Hello YouTube, Dave here again. Today we are returning to the Age of Worms adventure path as we take a look at part 2 of the 12-part adventure path, as this adventure is the Three Faces of Evil. This originally appeared in Dungeon Magazine issue 125 from August of 2005, so quite a while ago. Sometimes I hate looking at the publication years of these because it just makes me feel so much older as time goes on. But anyway, so this is, like I said, the part 2 of the Age of Worms adventure path. The Three Faces of Evil is designed for a group of 4 third-level characters. So they should have ended the last adventure, the Whispering Cairn, at level 3. So they start this one at level 3, and I believe they reach level 5 by the time that they complete everything here. This adventure also has a heavy emphasis on the Ebon Triad, which I really, I loved their, the mystery of them as in their involvement with the Shackled City adventure path, because they were a minor part of that. But this is the adventure path where we really get to know them much more closer. Or to quote South Park, closelier than we ever would in the previous adventure path. So this takes place pretty much immediately after the events of the Whispering Cairn. So the player characters, they went through a Wind Duke burial tomb. They discovered a necromancer that had this green worm in this a jar filled with preservatives. And not quite knowing exactly what to do next, other than the fact that they're a group of cultists operating in some sort of temple somewhere in Diamond Lake. The party returns to an NPC ally, patron, mentor character, a wizard by the name of Aliston. I actually completely forgot to mention him in the last video. He doesn't play a huge role in the first chapter. He's someone that sort of steers the players towards the Whispering Cairn, if you want to do that, but he does take on a larger role in this installment, starting here, and in other future chapters as well. So he is a human wizard, and he refers to himself as the smartest man in Diamond Lake, with the information that the player characters gave him, as well as the sample of the green Caius worm. Aliston does get to work and discovers that the temple that they're looking for is actually located beneath the Dowerstone mine, a copper mine operated by Ragnalin Dowerstone. So Ragnalin is a business rival of Balabar Smenk, and if you remember, Smenk was the one who hired Filge in the first installment to study the worm and to try to figure out what the cultists were doing. So it turns out that the temple is actually located underneath the mine of one of Balabar's biggest rivals. So even though the player character sort of disrupted Balabar's schemes in the first installment, he is a begrudging ally here, although he's most likely giving the player characters information about Dowerstone Mine in order to sort of suit his own purposes. We definitely haven't seen the last of Balabar Smink. I will tell you that for sure. The next section of the adventure essentially involves the characters finding a way to infiltrate the mines. It is up to them how they wish to do it. They can try stealth, they can try bribery, they can try posing as workers. It does give you a few different bits of information for that, including information on the different groups that you find inside, like the guards, the miners, the foremen, and it gives you information as to how susceptible they may be to bribes, because Diamond Lake is pretty corrupt overall. The entrance to the temple that the players are looking for is found down a mine shaft that has been roped off and basically determined to be unsafe or unfit, although any of the cultists operating in the area, as well as Mr. Dowerstone himself, this lovely dwarven fella, he knows that it actually leads to an elevator that goes down into the Dark Cathedral. So the Dark Cathedral, when you first come down, it gives you, there's three different hallways, that you can take. One to the north, one to the east, one to the west. And to the south, there is this ominous pool of shimmering black liquid that I'm sure won't play a role later on in the adventure. So each 3 of the hallways lead to a different temple. So this is, again, a stronghold of the Ebon Triad. And the Ebon Triad, if you didn't see the first video, or if you kind of forgot about them, they are a heretical religious sect made up of followers of the gods Vecna, Hextor, and Erythmal. And essentially, they believe that the divine spark that powers these gods all originated from one great overgod. And they're attempting to restore this overgod to life. So you have heretics basically amongst these three religions that are working together to try to bring about the return of this overgod. The main religions, Erythmal, Hextor, and Vecna, all view these individuals as like fringe members. They view them as unstable or insane. And of course, they will deny the fact that their god was once is a smaller part of a once larger being. So the first area that the adventure gives us after the Dark Cathedral is going to the east, which brings us to the the Citadel of Hextor. Sorry. So the Citadel of Hextor is a nice, orderly dungeon location. A few different rooms to explore, a logical layout, square rooms. Everything is very, like I said, very orderly. And it does sort of represent the lawfulness of Hextor, I think, rather well. A few of the more interesting encounters here. In Area 5, we have this dire boar, which is just referred to as Beast, and he is the mascot, if you will, of the Temple of Hextor here. You do fight like some acolytes. I believe there's also a few undead guardians here as well, so a few skeletons that they use. The main encounter area is this area here, Area 11, and there's actually two different levels to it. So if you come through the double doors here, you're sort of in the lower section, and this is the battle shrine, I think it's called. Let me just get to the actual description here. The Battle Temple of Hextor, and it's more or less like a gladiatorial pit. And this is sort of an interesting, subtle form of foreshadowing, which we'll talk about in a future installment. But along the top here, there is an elevated section. I think it's about 15 feet above the ground there, and there is a throne or a seat for the high priest of the Hextor cultists, a man by the name of Theldric, to sort of watch over and observe. So that was actually a really big fight when I ended up running it. I'll talk a little bit about some of the changes that I made to the rule system as I was going, because this was the first adventure where I started implementing quite a few house rules to switch things up. But like I said, I'll get to that sort of towards the end. But he ended up defeating him. The idea behind going down here is to drive away the cultists, and taking out their leaders is sort of the main way to do that. You also find some notes and stuff in Theldric's, and within his personal chambers, and we'll talk more about those again at the end of the adventure. Taking the hallway to the west brings us to the Caves of Erythmal. So if the Temple of Hextor was, orderly and square rooms, everything being, very precise, the Caves of Erythmal are more or less designed to capture the chaotic nature of the god of slaughter. So these are, by contrast to having like the fine work stone of the Temple of Hextor, these are just a series of chaotic natural caverns with different ways to get across them, including a pit here with a sort of like a rope bridge that takes the players up into the main area of the caves. The cultists of Hextor are largely composed of Grimlocks in this case, which is actually really cool because they are a creature that are sort of underutilized. So it's really cool to see a bunch of Grimlocks in here. There's a Grimlock Barbarian, which is one of the higher ranking members of the cult. There's also a few chokers and some other sort of like Underdark style creatures here. The main encounter in this area is with the High Priest of Erythmal, and that is the Grimlock by the name of Grallic Kerr, and this guy is awesome. He actually has the symbol of Erythmal like burned into his chest. He's dyed his hair red. I think it's with blood, actually. I can't remember 100%. But yeah, he's got the like dyed red hair that he cuts really short. And the empty eye sockets that Grimlocks typically have, because they are a subterranean race that are 100% completely and totally blind. They rely on blind sense. Grallic's actually taken preserved beholder eyes and actually sewn them into the empty sockets where like a normal human's eyes would be. So it gives him this really like wide-eyed and unblinking sort of just crazed look. He was awesome. He was a ton of fun to run. And again, so another cleric character, but he was just, I just love the design. I love the look of him. Just really, really awesome. Taking the hallway to the north leads to probably the most potentially tedious section of this adventure, and I definitely didn't run it as intended, but I'll sort of touch on that as we go here. But going up north takes you to the Labyrinth of Vecna. Vecna is the god of secrets, the god of magic, so it shouldn't be any surprise that this labyrinth is filled with secret doors that need to be found, as well as some patrolling guards. My favorite would have to be like the Kenkus and then the dire weasels, like the paired dire weasels. I always remember looking at this art and thinking it was like a two-headed weasel at first, but then I realized that no, they are two separate ones. It's just the way that they're drawn. I actually do really like that artwork. I think that was a really cool image. But you have these guardians, these patrols, basically going, sort of moving more or less throughout the labyrinth, but they have sort of set spots where you may encounter them. At the end of the maze, we come to an encounter with, again, the most intriguing member of the cult of the Ebon Triad here. An encounter with the Faceless One. And yeah, this guy is super creepy and cool and just an awesome villain. I kind of wish that he was used more throughout the campaign. I mean, you fight him here and that's it. But he's a human whose face is completely like blank and featureless. His eyes are pure black. The only feature really on his face is this really like pointy, small, angular nose. Like even the mouth looks more like a slit basically than an actual mouth. And he sort of talks with this like weird, almost like, it's like a high-pitched, raspy voice. It's something that personally I wasn't able to role play because I really have extreme difficulties modifying my voice. But yeah, again, just a really, really cool enemy here. He is a human wizard. So whereas the other two were clerics, it makes a bit more sense for a leader of a cult of Vecna worshippers to actually be a wizard. But yeah, so this guy is really, really awesome. So once the players sort of defeat all three of the cultists, like the cultist groups, especially like taking out their leaders, destroying the leadership structure, and if any cultists remain, they may end up leaving the region. But the players do find some journal entries as well as some notes that make mention of the fact that this group of Ebon Triad cultists were interested in a region known as the Mist Marsh, as there was some reports of unusual, unkillable undead there that may in fact bear the gifts of Caius, these green Caius worms. There's mention that the Triad has been in contact with some of the local lizard men, and that they're trying to procure some specimens of the Caius worms for their purposes. So with the cults defeated, with the information of where to go next secured, you would think that everything is pretty much well in hand and the adventure is over. But there is one last major encounter, and that is when the players make their way back out to the Citadel where the elevator is. The dark pool of liquid begins to stir and bubble up, and this creature, this aspect of the Ebon Lord, bursts forth, and it's sort of this like final climactic encounter. And he takes on several aspects of the different gods that he's partially modeled after or made after. A process that involves like dark magics, rituals, things. I believe there's even like the Caius worms that they had were used in the ritual to create this creature. But again, he takes on aspects of all of the gods. So he's like bestial and savage like Erythmal. So very chaotic in appearance, and very just very like evil, bestial looking creature. He has 6 arms like Hextor, but several of them are actually missing. Well, I shouldn't say several, but some of them are actually missing their hand on one of their sides. So again, similar to the hand of Vecna. This was actually again a really awesome encounter. Again, very powerful creature as well, and this is an unfinished version of it. So this is sort of a weaker version of what you may or may not encounter later on, this Ebon aspect. But he has abilities like the Bloodthirst of Erythmal. So the Ebon aspect is a fearsome combatant driven by primal bloodlust of Erythmal's savage fury. Once per day as a free action, it can enter a terrific fury for 1 round. During this time, Erythmal's divine power infuses it with might. The aspect gains damage reduction of 10/epic. For third level characters, nobody's getting past that. And fast healing 10 and a +4 profane bonus to attack rolls and damage rolls. Another ability that it has is the Standard of Hextor. So the Ebon aspect can call upon Hextor to aid in battle once per day by casting Spiritual Weapon. So as a spell-like ability, it appears like as Hextor's Flail. Gets +13 to attack roll. Again, that's pretty good for characters being like 4th level at this point. And 1d8 +3 force damage. And then it has the Blessing of Vecna. So Vecna grants the aspect of the Overgod a strange power over magic. If the caster check to defeat the Ebon aspect spell resistance fails, the Ebon aspect heals damage equal to twice the level of the spell that was targeted on it. So if you cast like Magic Missile, for example, and you fail the spell resistance check, then he would actually heal 2 hit points back because first level spell, healing twice that. Or if you use like Acid Arrow, for example, or Acid Arrow might not qualify because I don't think it has spell resistance. But if you use a 2nd level spell that grants spell resistance, you would get 4 hit points back. Again, just a really, really powerful, awesome creature to end the adventure on. And that's really it. I mean, this is one of the shorter adventures in this series. You do still have quite a few areas to explore, so it's not like it's necessarily something where, it feels like you didn't do anything by the time you finished it. Like, there are still a number of locations, several fights, and there are some really challenging fights in here as well. So overall, even though it's one of the shorter ones, the way that it's written, it still takes a pretty decent amount of time to go through. I think it took us, I want to say each of the cathedrals, or each of the different, like, the Caves of Erythmal, the Shrine of Hextor, and the Labyrinth of Vecna. I want to say each one of those was a session in of themselves when I was running it, along with the encounter with the Ebon aspect sort of at the end of the final one. But yeah, it was a lot of fun to go through. And again, I loved sort of the short and sweet, but it's like there's still a lot of stuff to do in terms of like combats and discovering what's sort of going on and getting more of a glimpse into what's really affecting things here. So you learn a bit more about the Ebon Triad, their obsession with Caius, their desire to acquire more Caius worms from these lizard folk that are living in the Mist Marsh, which is where like the next adventure is going to take place in. The encounter with the Ebon aspect again was really awesome. The only thing that I would say was a bit of a detraction was the Labyrinth of Vecna was probably the weakest part of the adventure, just because it relies so much on like searching for secret doors and navigating. Like if you're a group that really loves mapping things out, then it's a really cool section to go through. Our group wasn't super keen on doing that, so I switched things up a little bit. They made twists and turns, and eventually I had them fight one of the encounters that was in the labyrinth. A little bit later, I'd let them if they search for a secret door after a certain amount of time, if they found one, it would move them one step closer to the end of the labyrinth. And I kind of ruled that they needed to go through 3 secret doors to get there. I didn't want to overly extend that version just because we weren't mapping, just because it's not something that the group really enjoyed doing. And again, I just kind of wanted to keep it relatively easy for them to go through. So you probably could have gotten another session maybe out of the adventure had you run it like straight as it's presented in the magazine. And if we were using like miniatures and a grid, it would have been I probably would have been more likely to do that at that point, but I didn't own any. I didn't own any graph paper when I went to run this adventure, so we basically just sort of went with an easier method. They still got the major fights out of the way, and then they made their way through the labyrinth. But the section where they meet with Balabar Smink, someone who really despises them to get information about the mine, and then the players coming up with plans to infiltrate the mine. That was a section that I thought was a lot of fun. I honestly forget what my players settled on. I want to say it was a combination of stealth and bribes for some of the individuals. I really can't remember. I wish I could, but I mean, I ran this almost a decade ago, so my memory of all the events that took place are unfortunately not as good as they could have been. But yeah, it was a really, like I said, a really solid adventure. The three different religious groups, they each had a very different feeling area for the players to explore, and I think they actually did a really good job of capturing the feel of the deities in the way that their little temples were basically laid out. Even though I didn't run the labyrinth as a labyrinth per se, I still admire and respect the way that it was structured, and I think it, again, really captured the essence of trying to get through a Vecna stronghold really, really well. The same with the Temple of Hextor and the Caves of Erythmal. Again, just sort of had that savage, untamed, uncivilized sort of feel to it. So I think they did a really good job. All three of the villains, the Feldrick, Gralikur, and the Faceless One, I thought they were all really cool as well. Feldrick was probably the least interesting of the group, just being an evil priest of Hextor. But Gralikur and the Faceless One were really, really awesome. I actually had plans on integrating the Faceless One into future D&D campaigns that I haven't actually seen through yet, but it's something that I might actually do now because I'm reminded of just, again, how cool his design was. Again, I just really love the look of him, this is, again, the creepy sort of like raspy, high-pitched voice, just, the very, like, I want to say he also sort of talks in almost like a whisper. Anyway, he's just a really, really cool villain. And overall, again, I think it's a pretty solid adventure. Now, when I went to run this myself, this was at a point where I was getting really fatigued on 3rd edition and 3.5 D&D. I wasn't interested in moving into Pathfinder 1st edition, although that's something that I would be more receptive to now. But at the time, I was really starting to get into 4th edition D&D. I was really starting to like some of the things that I had seen. And by this point, when I was running this, the box sets and everything for the D&D Essentials line, those were all out. So I had those in my possession. So I actually did make some changes to stat blocks. So, for example, each one of the leaders of the cults, I sort of made them elite. Just because you largely fought them sort of by themselves, or instead of having like warriors or stuff with them, I would actually use minions. So they sort of pad things out a little bit, so it wasn't just necessarily the entire party on one person. So I used like a small group of minions, as well as giving them the elite status, which basically doubled their hit points and gave them like an extra +1 armor class and like in one of their saving throws. As and stuff like that, or like +1 to their attack rolls, or things along those lines. But it made the fights more challenging, and I think the group actually really liked the way that felt. And then the Ebon aspect actually made a solo monster, which in 4th edition D&D, solo monsters, because a group of 5 was considered to be the standard group. For 4th edition, your solo monsters had 5 times the hit points of a regular one. I gave him 4 times the hit points that he normally had. And again, it was a tough fight, but the players were really engaged. They really seemed to enjoy it. And the fight actually lasted more than just a couple rounds, which was one of the things that, you could always say was sort of a bit of a disappointment in 3rd edition D&D, is that a lot of especially if they're NPCs, which were designed using the same guidelines as making a player character, though typically worse, that, they just couldn't last. And generally you get, 2 rounds maybe out of them before the players just completely destroyed them. Especially if they were going up against a party, by themselves. So, giving them like the elite status, the fights lasted, I think on average, I want to say each one went for like 5 or 6 rounds. And then the Ebon God was a pretty lengthy fight that had a lot of use for the cleric's healing abilities, like their spontaneous ability to cast heal spells. It gave the arcane characters chances to fully use up their spell repertoire, but also they had to be a little bit more careful about how they used them. There was more of a reliance on scrolls, I want to say, in the early stages of this campaign. But yeah, it was just overall, I think that it worked out pretty well. One of the most memorable fights was actually in the battle shrine of Hextor, the little gladiatorial arena, where that's actually where Theldrick had made his stand against the player characters when I was running it. So it was him, as well as it was like a group of 8 minion acolytes. So minions only had a single hit point, but if anything was save versus like save for half, and they succeeded, they would take no damage, and their saving throws, instead of rolling them, I would just have them set as 10 plus whatever their modifier would be. But again, it was just a really fun fight, and the players really liked that style. It made them feel more powerful by being able to just, like cut their way through the minions to make it to, the bigger threat. But they also appreciated the fact that the bigger threat felt like more of a threat because he had more staying power than you might typically have. So overall, again, it was a really solid adventure. I really enjoyed running it, and so like I said, this campaign from this point forward had more 4th edition concepts sort of mixed in. This was also around the time that I modified things like damage reduction and spell resistance, to sort of give them mainly to like elite or solo monsters instead of just like every like person that you might come across, because 3rd edition D&D had a lot of damage reduction and spell resistance on things where it just was more of a nuisance than anything else. So again, that was just a personal thing. It was just something that I was really burned out on and tired of by the time I was running this, because I was running this in 2011. Which was 3 years after 3rd edition D&D 3.5 had wrapped up. And I'd been running 3rd edition from day one, basically, prior. So after 11 years, you kind of get weary of certain things. And to lose spells, or to have like, again, the more like minion style creatures take longer to go through, or like to lose spells against them, it just felt weak. We sort of discussed it as a group, and there was changes they made. Yeah, they didn't really, those aspects didn't apply too much to this adventure, but later on, spell resistance stuff, the changes to that did make getting through some of the other chapters a little less frustrating for the players, and a little easier and quicker to go through overall, while still maintaining challenge. But that's, again, I'll try to tell those stories as we come. But for now, like I said, this was a very solid chapter. Short and to the point, but still gives you lots of things to fight, lots of things to discover. And that encounter with the Ebon aspect was, again, just something that sort of set the tone for what the players can expect going forward. So that was my look at the 3 Faces of Evil for the Age of Worms adventure path. Let me know in the comments below if any of you played through this adventure path or ran it as a dungeon master. What were some of your memories of this chapter? Did you run the labyrinth as is, or did you modify things to streamline it a bit? How the players react when the Ebon aspect emerged? Just let me know what your experiences were. What was your favorite of 3 cult leaders? Mine has to be, it's a tie between the Faceless One and Gralikur. I think Gralikur just because of how crazy he looks, but the Faceless One, I think, makes for a more interesting villain overall. One that I wish they would have done, that he would have been more present. But this is only the 2nd chapter. There's not much you could have done with him beforehand. Anyway, once again, thank you guys very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next month. Well, see you before then with other videos, but next month, in June, when I take a look at the 3rd installment, where the player characters make their way to the Mist Marsh and discover what's going on with the lizard folk that are native to there, as well as the possibility of running into the spawns of Caius. So thanks a lot for watching. I'll see you next time. Until then, take care.